if you are having any symptoms when you are under the age of 45, you got to go in and you've got to demand. Of course, somebody like me who lost their mom to the disease, like I have to get a colonoscopy. But for somebody else that did not have family history, I highly recommend.
Welcome to Target Cancer Podcast. My name is Dr. Sanjay Juneja. I'm a hematologist and medical oncologist, also known as the Onc Doc on social news media. And today we're going to talk about something that I am sure everyone has heard about, and I get a lot of questions about because it's a very real thing. And I'm personally grateful that a lot of attention has been taken to it, and that's on colorectal cancer. And we've had multiple episodes on diet and nutrition, or even exposures environmentally. What is, kind of contributing to the causes or those observations we're making as far as how many people are being diagnosed and the age they're being diagnosed. We've also had episodes where we've come a long way when it comes to colorectal cancer, especially with immune therapy for MSI high stuff. But I couldn't be more excited about having someone paint the picture kind of as a whole, and really how, as a community, things are being done for advocacy to make, ensure patients are on top of it, because it's a kind of a different cancer that gives you a lead time, somewhat like, cervical cancer, if you're lucky or fortunate. And also a lot of the stuff on the horizon that hopefully we can catch things earlier and hopefully be cured of these things. So to do all that, we have the Chief Executive Officer of the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, Michael Sapienza, to tell us about all the exciting things that are happening to hopefully have us on top of colorectal cancer and what we should be thinking about. So with all that said, Michael, thanks so much for being here, and we're happy to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, I'm sure for what I receive as far as kind of guidance on what to do to avoid colorectal cancer, stay on top of it, yours is 100 to 1,000-fold. I'd be very interested to know what made you interested in this specifically, if you're willing to share. And then we can go about, how we are adapting to a lot of the observations that we hear about in the news.
Yeah, absolutely. So to make a kind of a long story short, I was a professional musician by training. I went to Juilliard, Northwestern, Rice University. Yeah, that's what I did for a living for a very a short time, I guess, maybe about a decade. And in 2006, I was performing with an orchestra called the New World Symphony in Miami Beach, Florida, with Michael Tilson Thomas, who unfortunately now has glioblastoma, still doing very, very well. And one of the first performances I had while I was there was I was playing principal trumpet on the Shostakovich Symphony No. 5, and Yo-Yo Ma was actually performing the cello. And anyway, my parents then called me the next morning. They knew to wait at least until after the performance. And they both called me, and I knew that was weird too, because why do both your parents call me? And my mom said, we've hit a bump in the road. So to make a long story shorter, my mom had, she was like, Michael, there's a mass in my colon. And I'm like, well, where the heck is your colon? You know what I mean? It's like small intestine, large intestine. What is this thing? And fast forward to 2009 on Mother's Day, my mom died from the disease. And at that time, I said, this is like ridiculous. So it's the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths for both men and women combined. My brother was like, well, if you had $1 million, what would you be doing? And I was like, I was like, well, I don't have $1 million. So he's like, well, what would you be doing? I can tell you're not interested in music. And I said, well, I would start a colon cancer foundation. And that's what I did. And so what happened was that, we grew pretty quickly, a family foundation, to be a couple $1 million. And then in 2014, we merged with what was then the Colon Cancer Foundation. We had a budget of about $5.5 million when we merged in 2016. And here we are, 2024, we're the largest organization in the world. We have a budget of about $50 million. And we just launched something called Project Cure CRC. It'll be the largest philanthropic investment ever in the disease. About $100 million over 2 years. So yeah, that's kind of like the short story of how kind of I got into this field.
Can't say that Juilliard gets to say often everything that you just shared with us at the very end on what you've accomplished. So
right.
Yeah, that's, and that's one thing that I think is very humbling being in cancer. And I've said it before, and I think most people that listen also have it, is is it is just something that when it is in your world and presence, you really kind of appreciate how much can be done and needs to be done, because you've, kind of witnessed something firsthand. And I'm very sorry that went, your family went through that, especially as a surprise. But I, have to believe that she's very proud about what you're doing because of that event that you all experienced, and many, like you said, being the second cause in men and women, experience on a daily basis. So I guess we'll start with, let's start with the research, the more recent research, why we're talking about this and why you're here sharing this with us, because it's kind of just pops into the news and kind of causes a lot of scare and calamity. But we're going to provide what you can do, in addition to getting the news of the fact that the rates are getting younger and kind of more frequent.
Yeah. So first I would just say, if you look at the 5-year metastatic survival rate of colorectal cancer and you compare that to other cancers that are less common, less deadly, et cetera, we're still not doing very well. So the 5-year metastatic survival rate for colorectal cancer is about 13%. The metastatic 5-year survival rate for breast cancer is around 35%. We are still treating patients with the same first-line treatment that we did about 20 years ago. And there has been no change to that, except for a very small amount of patients, as you alluded to at the beginning, that have MSI high colorectal cancer. And even some of those we still aren't, depending on where you're being treated, et cetera. So, I think the biggest thing that I would say just about where we're going is we've got to have additional treatments, whether we're talking about vaccines, whether we're talking about CAR T, whether we're talking about immunotherapy. We call it, the cold to hot tumors, like looking at tumor microenvironment. There's a lot of reasons why, in my opinion, folks aren't doing that, but we also need additional targets. We don't have breast cancer or leukemia and lymphoma or others, right? The targets that we need to be able to work on. We were just at ASCO, whatever week that was, last week or the week before. And, we work very closely. Our chief medical consultant is a gentleman named Dr. John Marshall from Georgetown. And he basically, he was holding these companies to account and saying, we've been using the same standard of care for over 20 years, and you cannot say that for any other type of cancer. On the other side of it, I would say there are promising new targets or new treatments that we found for BRAF, for example, which is a very, very small amount of colorectal cancer patients. HER2, most folks know about HER2 because of breast cancer. But we have a lot to learn about the disease. We have a lot to really truly understand, all the things. So far, CAR T has failed. So far, the vaccines have failed. I don't mean to be a cynic, but we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, I can't really even say why that's the case when you kind of compare it to the other cancer types. One thing that I'm, try to press upon very strongly, very, very strongly, and I think AI will help when AI is kind of a co-pilot on analyzing labs, is, a simple tip-off of iron deficiency, even before you're anemic. You see iron getting low with that RDW, the size of the red blood cell kind of creeping up before you even get microcytic or the MCV going down. And then I just, my residents that I teach and my clinic knows reflex, iron profile, because shouldn't be iron deficient unless you had, upper GI surgery or have a unique diet. And it's a challenging question when, patients and families will say, well, how long did they have it? Is there any way to know? And then we're kind of looking and you can kind of see when maybe the iron deficiency started. So I think in that way, I'm saying that because oftentimes you just kind of slowly bleed over time, and so that's one tip off that usually something's already there. But a lot of times then when I push the screening and press upon it, you see a tubulophilus adenoma, which is kind of a precancer. And I'm kind of more excited than them. It got a tip off. We found something that could have been, cancer in a couple of years, single digit percentage. But that's, at a very early place. But even earlier than that, we're not depending on necessarily losing blood. Some people say, isn't there just a blood test, right? And so we had the CMO of GRAIL and we kind of talked about those things, but really knowing when and the affordability is hard. the thing you can always lean on is at a minimum, things that are approved as screening guidelines. Recently, the colonoscopy, which is a visualization, basically the camera goes in and checks, all through the piping to see if anything looks sketchy, for lack of a better word, has come down. And if anyone's listening, they're like, well, why can't you just check on the CAT scan? But it's like, it's all meshy and kind of laying on top of each other. So it's very, very hard to elucidate a couple of centimeters, on a scan. And that's been a challenge too. The screening modalities, can someone go get a colonoscopy? Is it nearby? Are they ordering it? But there's some other exciting things coming as well. Of course, we have the cards that can check for like a molecular, pattern or shedding of what may be a cancer lesion in the colon. Pretty good sensitivity if you use a couple. We had CMO of WebMD, John White. I think we talked about it briefly. So tell us about those things if you can, and if they've helped, what people should consider. And then I'm really interested in this whole, contrast or at least some kind of imaging that people get excited about to be able to visualize without, an invasive procedure at the end of the day.
Yeah. First thing, I just want to comment on your iron comment, because, if you think about this disease, and hopefully we'll talk about the young onset piece, but, the way that we look at the colon, we now know, right, the difference between left-sided disease and right-sided disease, what chemo actually or targeted agents may work on the left-sided versus the right-sided. And I actually think, and this wasn't my idea, this is other physicians, of course, but that the microbiome on the left side of the colon, the right side of the colon, the ascending or descending colon, and the rectum is completely different. And my guess is they're probably different diseases. And it could be from anything from, are we using too much antibacterial soap? Are we using too many antibiotics? Are we something environmental? Is it too much soda, sugar drinks versus vitamin D and vitamin C drinks? But something is changing in our microbiome that is affecting the production of polyps. So, we're trying to fund a lot of research to actually look into not just like studying the microbiome, but the why around that, right? And how is it different, and what could potentially be happening? So I just wanted to mention that piece around the microbiome. The next people around screening. So it's very interesting. We just held this think tank. We brought all the players together, at least of the existing modalities besides MCED. We did not bring in MCED, but so we had multi-cancer early detection. I'm assuming your audience knows, but we had obviously the colonoscopy folks, we had fit manufacturers, we had Cologuard from Exact Sciences, we had a new company called Genoscopy that has an mRNA stool test. We had Freenome, who's doing a blood test, and Guardant Health, who actually has a blood test that hopefully will be approved very soon by the FDA. And we were talking about this. A lot of doctors think of it from all right, how specific is it for cancer, and how sensitive is it for cancer? Well, okay, sure, that's important, but we've been stuck in terms of, as a country, and our screening rate's about 65% for a very long time, meaning we made some really good progress before the pandemic, the 10 years prior, but we still got about 35% and even more, depending on the age group, right, that are not getting screened. So, what I said was, we've got to look at these numbers, not just sensitivity, specificity, but we've got to look at adherence and access alongside data, right? Because we've been talking about adherence, right? Are people going to actually do the test? But what about access to the test? And so we had this whole conversation about, if you live in a rural area, how are you going to get a colonoscopy? If you have, are a single mom or a single dad and have an hourly job, and you have to take off 12 hours of work between the prep and the actual procedure, how are you going to get a colonoscopy? That's access, right? And I think it's really important, screening rate now, the age is 45, right? Period. There may be one or two outlier groups that are saying it's not, but it is 45. And, of course, somebody like me who lost their mom to the disease, I have to get a colonoscopy. But for somebody else, like whoever that did not have family history, I highly recommend a Cologuard or a FIT test, as long as if it is positive, right, that you go get that follow-up. And then I would just say for the blood test, like, we're going to be there very soon. We're going to be there super soon. Because you think about it, and you like, the way that I think about it is I think about this like I don't know if you remember the Consumer Reports, either online or whatnot, when they had like the dark circles, if it was good or red or whatever, right? So each of these tests have different attributes, right? And none of them are perfect. None of them are. But if whoever makes a blood test could, buy a fleet of 1,000 vans and go to underserved areas / rural areas and get these people screened with a blood test, okay, it may not be as sensitive or as specific as a colonoscopy or even as a Cologuard, but it could save somebody's life, right?
Sure.
And so I do think it's going to be very interesting kind of where we go. And of course, I'm not talking about MCEDs. I'm specifically talking about like, blood tests or these either ctDNA or ctRNA tests.
We pardon this interruption real quick. If you're enjoying this podcast or find it valuable for what we discuss and the education and how people see and think about cancer in general, we would very much appreciate a like, subscribe, and especially a share so we can bring that information as maximally and broadly as possible. Thank you so much for listening. As I'm listening to you, I'm wondering, and it's always unpopular to talk about anything that's, federal or even state if it's something that's coming from there when it comes to health, but having a grant, even fine, state by state, where every time you get that notice where you got to renew your car registration and put on the new thing and pay, $45 or your license, just, at those same intervals, just because you're staying up to date with the person's location, the age and everything. If there were relationships to where that could also be sent up, I mean, you have the address where you can send it back because of the access issue, right? I live in Louisiana. I've been here my whole life, and there are just so many good people that just aren't privy to even the primary doctor within a 100-mile radius is so saturated with the heart failures, this and that. They're giving their lives up to take care of those issues, and they still just, it's just hard to have the sit down conversations. So, I'm sure y'all are doing work with that federal, state, thinking about that on how these materials, if nothing else, and the ability to screen, could kind of be, diversified or at least, expanded. Now, if anyone's listening, they might be like, well, pharma stuff and, testing stuff. Why would we want to know we have cancer? We've said it before, but it's the whole concept. The same way that you cut out a basal cell or a squamous cell of the scan, or the pap smears, you got to go back and do another, cut out the area and everything liberally around it. Kind of like if you have a bad brown spot on a peach, right? Or an apple, and there's two kinds of people that would just chuck the whole apple, which would be my wife. I would be like, it's a perfectly good apple minus, and then I cut it out. And so that same principle is the hope when we're talking about screening. Is like, if it's got to happen, tons of stuff is going to try to figure out how we can reduce the chance. If it's going to be a precancer or cancer, and that it's a stage 1, goober, or even precancer, these are the things that we're talking about. Is like, how do we just spare someone? Even a hemicolectomy, meaning take out half your colon, because that's generally what you do if you can't just, cut it off while you're in there from the camera endoscopy thing, colonoscopy, or then of course chemotherapy. Like, that's the point. So I just want to nix that argument about like industry stuff. Conversation we're having actively is how do we make us not need pharma, right? That way we can actually have, which pharma is, very needed in its own right, but we both. And most people want that, is to where it's not even necessary. So I just needed to drive that point home. But yeah, so that's the screening modalities are all kind of evolving, and there's hopefully things like this that can help people reach it. What are some of the things that, and I know you hate this question, are causing possibly this earlier rise? Like, you talked about microbiome, and I love that. The extra layer is also how kind of the dexterity of your immune system, which we know is kind of, fighting precancer cells and kind of nixing things that could have become cancer all the time in us. Anyone that has the capacity to listen to this has avoided cancer, because of your T cells and lymphocytes, etc. And we know they kind of get their training from the gut in the stomach and small bowel. It's just a very rich environment to where that's where they're learning things. That's where they're kind of downloading their software. And, we had Jason Fung, who feels pretty strongly about it. Well, we've actually had multiple guests where the thought is it because our diets are so less dimensional, right? Like my kids are picky. They have chicken nuggets, fries, the diversity of the kind of vegetables and all of these things, fruits, when that narrows, and if that's your download database to be able to train the dexterity and kind of accuracy of your immune system, I'm over speaking a bit. That's one theory. Another theory is not necessarily sugar, but the insulin is what Jason Fung says. It's like insulin's a growth factor. And we know there are a few areas in your body that require growth as much as what? The things that get affected with chemo. Your hair, your skin, your gut. That's why you get nauseous, lose your hair, and have skin changes. So insulin may be driving that kind of growth process. What are your thoughts? And I know it probably takes half a day, but let's take a shot at it.
Yeah. It actually doesn't take me half a day because we don't know.
There we go.
We really don't know. I hate to say it, but because if we knew, we'd be able to end it tomorrow, right? So Rebecca Siegel, who is with the American Cancer Society, probably one of the best epidemiologists in the world, she's done a lot of like correlative studies, but they're still not long enough to really know and pinpoint one thing or two things. She does say she thinks it's multifactorial. So it could be, like you're saying, is it the insulin piece? Is it your microbiome? Is it a combination of both? Is it whatnot? But I will say, everybody always asks me, is it because of our diet in this country? And again, I've probably met 1,000 young onset patients, meaning people under the age of 45, that are cardboard eating, marathon running people that get stage 4.
Yep.
And it does not matter what they eat or how they eat or whatnot. I remember there was this article in the Washington Post with a good friend of mine now, and they blamed it, like the Washington Post indirectly blamed it on the food trucks she was eating at during work. It's just, we do not know. We do not know what it is. We need to find out why for sure. Sometimes there's like hints of studies that say there's a small biological difference depending on where exactly we're talking about and what study it is. But there is nothing yet that shows us exactly what it is. And so for me, the biggest thing that I always say, just from an awareness perspective, for anybody that's listening, including physicians, because I can't tell you how many GI docs I've met who have actually gotten colorectal cancer. And I'm like, that can't be, is like, if you are having any symptoms when you are under the age of 45, right, you got to go in and you've got to demand, because what we have found via surveys is that it takes on average of 3 visits to a GI doc or your primary care physician before they find it. They're like, oh, go take some Metamucil, or, oh, you have hemorrhoids or whatnot. And then when they go back, it's late stage by the time that they find it. And so that's the biggest thing. You know how busy doctors are, and especially primary care doctors, right? They have so many hundreds of diseases they have to worry about, although I would bias in saying it's the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths, and it's the number 1 cancer killer for men under 50 and number 2 cancer killer for women under 50. So we should be paying attention to it. But I do say we have to take some personal responsibility too, because right now we don't know why it's happening.
And when you say symptoms, just so you could, let our audience know, which ones have you seen?
Yeah. So unexpected or unexplained weight loss, blood in your stool, change in bowel habits, night sweats, cramping. If any of those things last more than 3 weeks, you absolutely should see your doctor. And I, in my opinion, obviously this does not mean you have colon cancer. I always have to say that, right? There's, there's plenty of other things that it could be. But you've got to be your own advocate, and you got to get in there and make sure you get in there early and don't wait.
Yeah. So pardon my ignorance, but I'm thinking out loud, and I'm embarrassed, quite frankly, to ask this question. If I have an iron deficient patient, or something, sure, I can get a fecal occult blood, meaning like, is there any kind of tiny bit of blood in this. But say you're under 45, I feel so just, ignorant asking this, but you can't opt for a Cologuard at 40. The only choice you have to investigate colon cancer, which has its own bottleneck, right? Because now you're talking about getting on the schedule, you're talking about seeing the GI. Is there any thought behind possibly offering a more kind of quicker option and accessible option like the ones we use for screening?
Yeah, so now we can talk about, I don't want to say voodoo, but off-label. So if my friends or anybody I know, this is not me in my official capacity, I have to make sure I say that, but I'll be go to the pharmacy and get a fit test. You can buy, or you can go on Amazon and get one, because it'll, like you said, it'll see blood in your stool. And then if you have a positive that, you then can take it and you can say to the doctor, okay, I need a diagnostic colonoscopy. It won't be a preventative, right? You'll pay, it'll go against your copay or your coinsurance, et cetera. But you at least can get it without sounding like a crazy, crazy.
I mean, you have merit for yourself and for the medical facility. It's almost like having kind of a jump to the front of the line pass, because it's important. Screening means we're just shooting at the dark on a biologic age. This is abnormal, and it is imperative that we rule out a pre-cancer cancerous lesion.
Yeah. So Cologuard cannot be used via its label, right? It's FDA label for anybody under the age of 45 as of now. Colonoscopy can, but only as a diagnostic tool.
Right.
So, right. And one of the things that we are having lots of conversations with the FDA and these companies like Guardant Health and Freenome and Exact Sciences and whoever else that I'm forgetting that I'm sure will get mad. But is about, are we trying to get these approved for earlier ages? Because think about it, part of why we're not approving some of these tests for younger is, cost benefit analysis. And so if a blood test is cheaper and can be done in conjunction with other things that you need, we may be able to get approval there.
Yeah. And that's where, another application for machine learning, I learned very quickly when I got out, the sobering reality of what I was getting the feedback on my social media education as for industry, and they're not. Yes, the answer is yes, and it's true, and it is for profit. Most things are for profit in healthcare. But when machine learning can prove or demonstrate, which I'm very excited about, the cost of sleeping on something or deferring something, and say, actually, health insurance companies, whoever, saves a lot of money because of getting it moved forward, which I believe the case, and I think you believe the case. Then suddenly, sometimes you just have to, I hate to say it, I didn't create the system, I'm in it, play the game. And that's where I'm very excited and hopeful that the number crunching will show, whoa, we can actually really let this out, because the downstream cost savings, where you and I and everyone listening about this cares about the lives and the person and their, fatherhood, motherhood, siblingness, whatever the case may be. But the language in businesses are numbers. And I'm really excited to hopefully able to demonstrate that long term. That's the thing. Nobody wants to put in or it's costly to put in, a long-term evaluation for something that doesn't happen often. So if anyone's listening, that's the problem. It's if you don't have a high number or likelihood, recurrence studies are easy because unfortunately, I say that sensitively, recurrence is a thing, right? It's but if you're looking at a general population, that's where, machine learning and AI can truly, data science can say, hey, with the high statistical probability, you will save, the economic costs of doing it at XYZ, which hopefully would mean insurance rates come down. I mean, there are breaths of life and optimism with AI on otherwise a system that I think you could probably appreciate. For a long time, it's feeling like this is just going to bust at the seams.
Yeah, where I think AI could be used really, really effectively. So, and even today, if we could figure this out, is in risk stratification for prevention, not just colorectal cancer, but in any, in diseases that have multiple prevention modalities. So if you think about us, the colorectal cancer community, if there was a plugin for Epic or Cerner or whatnot that had some sort of AI calculation based on a whole number of things, including your CBC and blah, 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 family history, whatnot, it could say, oh, this person, they could get a blood test. This person definitely needs a colonoscopy. All right, this person needs a Cologuard, right? We could save so much money because my GI friends will kill me, but there are so many people that get colonoscopies that probably don't need them or need them as frequently, et cetera, which to your point, when you were asking me earlier, there's a huge backlog depending where you are. And then what does that mean for people that have emergent issues, right? It's not good. So like that type of AI, I mean, it would take huge system change, as you can imagine, et cetera, within health systems, but it could be game changing if we were able to do that and do it effectively. Yeah.
Yeah. I heard something yesterday. My buddy, Dr. Alok Patel, is a medical correspondent. He was speaking in the morning and he was like, y'all, he didn't say y'all, he's from the Northeast, but he said, you all, what world do we live in where people are presenting with a heart attack? Meaning you had a major coronary event. That blood vessel completely lost its fuel and oxygen to supply blood to your heart. People are presenting every day with, coronary artery disease, but in a critical way. And he's like, and you're telling me none of us like had an idea or practice with the doctors they saw of like, this is likely to happen, or this is undergoing, or this is, I mean, he said it so simply, but it was like mind blowing. It's like we already have all of the metrics of identification on risk and everything like that to say like, this is, to your exact point, likely, unlikely, very likely, etc. But we also had Daniel Kraft, who is just, freak of a human being. I mean, he's the NASA, aeroscience, pediatric hematology, oncology, adult, all these things. He talked to us about the wearables. So when you're talking about wearables now, yeah, you can structure the CBC, CMP and waist size. And Indians, we notoriously carry, most of our weight in our abdomen. And sure enough, some of the things that are associated with that metabolic syndrome come downstream of that. But these wearables can go even on a deeper level and actually check, these what are called chemokines or cytokines or interleukins, these communication conduits that we use all the time in our body that we don't actually measure on lab work that can kind of tell you of duress or inflammation, sed rate, erythematous, sedimentation rate. I use that for inflammation and infection, but it kind of is a process that's happening on the inner lining of the artery wall, the blood vessel. And that is fundamentally what happens over time when people end up having a heart attack, a stroke, kidney disease. And similarly to your point, imagine a wearable that longitudinally is on your, watch. And the same way you can use these apps and toggle what I'll look like in 10, 15, 20 years, you just kind of drag it, and then you drag it down and it's like, oh, look, this is what I look like. That's taking a couple of pictures of you. Imagine if you had something, day to day, hour to hour, to second, and then you actually uploaded all of the data that of events happening and what things led to that. Now you toggle forward and you can see what your 5-year, 10-year risk is for XYZ based on a tremendous amount of data.
Yeah.
And that I think you and I just kind of explained is a very good example. Data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning within artificial intelligence to be able to give us those patterns. I want to just do a pitch though, to saying none of that happens if we kind of cower about the data conversation. It doesn't mean that you just share everything everywhere, but I didn't even understand data until I got into this world. And it's not like Social Security card, national security, people trying to be president, like they released our data. I wish there was a different word.
Yeah.
What we mean is the metrics in science, the observations and variables and little units that we use to have modern medicine. If we could have more of those units, more of those access to those units, rather than having to fund it with a $10, $100 million trial, that is a quick way to just feed a very smart thing.
Yeah, we're actually building this right now. We've built the front end of a platform we call Blue HQ, which is like a patient-facing platform, but we're building the back end right now. We've been having conversations with everybody and their mother about what that looks like. And actually just had a call with the legal team today around, all right, who are we going to share with? How are we going to share? How are we going to bring it in? How are we going to bring it out? All the different data points. And, I've been thinking about this a lot, just coming from ASCO and I'll go off the record for a second, meaning as a son whose mom had cancer, I would want biopharma to do anything they possibly could to create a drug that would make my mom live 2 more months at that point. Now, in my role as the CEO of the largest colorectal cancer advocacy organization in the world, I see those $10 million tents at ASCO and it makes me want to puke, because I think to myself, we're in a capitalist society, like you said, which makes sense, right? But are we truly helping patients and their families the most we possibly can? If in fact we aren't sharing data and we aren't sharing it a lot, right? And I, imagine a world where, yes, it's still a capitalist society. We're still competing. We still have to make money, but is data freely available? And it's not, you know what I mean? And I know I sound crazy when I say it, but like there are disease states in which organizations have proven that they can force companies' hands to utilize the patient data that patient organization has, because they need it. The companies need it to be able to get FDA approval, et cetera, to find new targets, et cetera. So we're trying. It'll take us a bit to do that. But it is a little bit sad that is what is stopping us from having more innovation and more quickly.
Yeah. I love the way you said that. It's like, I asked that question. I think I had Scott Benberthy with Google, Doug Flora, chief editor of Alliance in Precision Oncology, Ezra and Sean Cozen. Anyway, the point is, I was the moderator and I asked the one question because we talked about AI and everything exciting. And I said, now the one thing, and I actually started with this. I was like, what does any of this matter if everyone's siloing and keeping their data? And anyone listening, they're like, I just don't get it. What are you saying? What I'm telling you is, and this was very upsetting yet again for me, people, when they get your lab report or they get your pathology or they get any reason to access your record, they keep it to themselves. Even if it's like, de-identified, like they keep it to themselves because they can sell it. And so what happens is people that want to make progress, I don't care if it's capitalistic, driven or not, but it's progress, have to either purchase it or all this stuff happens. And that's now, I think anyone listening, so we mentioned it a few times, but we've never hit it on the nose.
Yeah. That's
the issue. Now you have AI and data science that can actually even compute it. But again, if you're keeping it to yourself, institutions, y'all, I'm talking institutions too.
Yep.
And I get it, I get it to a degree, but it's like, then when you say like, oh, well, we want, we don't want to be, I'm not saying to socialize medicine by any means.
Yep.
But the whole concept more than ever, less regulation, more independence, like it would take something like a mandate you all have to share for the sake of humanity. We're not even talking about Americans.
Yeah.
We're talking about the money is actually more important right now than humanity for something that is the biggest, ailment to all of us.
Yep.
My point in the panel was when I asked that question, it was just kind of, just smirks or chuckles or just IBS. Like it was just, there's no answer. Nobody, we couldn't find a good answer. And that part is very scary. So I would love for you, Michael, to figure that out.
By tomorrow.
By tomorrow. That'd be great.
And it's a Saturday, so.
I'll tell you all the time.
Exactly.
Well, good. Do you have anything else? So, be your own advocate. That's a big kind of principle behind this here with this podcast, as well as my social media stuff. Anything else you want to share with us or how we can support you even, as a community on kind of making the changes that you and I are hoping to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things. So one is just for your own health, if anybody's listening and you don't know, go to getscreen.org. That's our kind of like screening quiz / knowing your risk for which test you should get for colorectal cancer. The second is ccalliance.org. As I mentioned, we just launched Project Cure CRC, the largest philanthropic investment ever in this disease. And, we're doing a lot to make sure that moves forward. I will tell you, the House just voted on their budget for 2024. And basically, we tried to get a line item in the Congressional Delegated Medical Research Program. I don't know if you even know that the Department of Defense has that. A lot of people do not. And of the top 5 cancers, colon cancer is the only one that does not have a dedicated program. Breast cancer gets $50 million a year. We get between 6 and 10, and it's really and it's we have to compete for it. It's not dedicated. And so yesterday we found out that it wasn't included, at least on the House side. We're trying to do all sorts of wrangling, and it's very interesting, just hearing that. So one of the things I would say is if any of your listeners want to contact their members of Congress and just say, we feel really strongly that colorectal cancer should be have a specific line item as part of CDMRP, that is something that I think could go a long way, because it's high risk, high reward funding within the Department of Defense.
That's excellent. That was a very big one. We were on Capitol Hills. Believe it or not, FIGS, the scrub company, has a advocacy group, and there were a few bills for funding, one of which, actually, they were mostly focused on preventative care and screening aid. But I didn't know that of that specific one, and that colorectal cancer wasn't a program. Well, Michael, thank you so much. Mad, just tremendous amount of respect for you, what you're doing. You're clearly very mission driven. Hopefully have you back when we've made some gains and can virtually high five with these efforts. But I don't even know how to close it. I'm very humbled by your story, and you're a true example of mission and passion. And I think the universe equips us, and I mean that sensitively. The universe, they position us to have to do things. You just have to, be aware of what it's saying and make action. And you very much did that. So, tremendous amount of respect.
I appreciate you, and thank you for bringing us on. The more awareness we get, the further progress we'll make. So thank you.